I am the forest. I take in your pollution and give you clean air, purify your water, and protect your shores. Yet you continue to cut me down, releasing carbon into the air and heating this planet. While some of you stand with me, most of you turn your backs on me. But I am resilient. Let me grow, and we can solve your climate problem together. When one tree falls, you might not hear it. But when millions fall, I assure you, you will feel it.
I am a flower. Yes, I'm beautiful. I've heard it before, and it never grows old. I'm worshipped for my looks, my scent, my looks. But here's the thing. Life starts with me. You see, I feed people. Every fruit comes from me. Every potato, me. Every kernel of corn, me. Every grain of rice, me. Me. I know, but it's true. And sometimes I feed their souls. I am their words when they have none. I say I love you without a sound. I'm sorry without a voice. I inspire the greatest of them. Painters, poets, pattern makers. I've been amused to them all. But in my experience, people underestimate the power of a pretty little flower. Because their life does start with me. And it could end without me.
Look up. There I am. I am the sky. I am a warm, protective blanket wrapped around everyone on Earth. I can bring clouds, rain, and wind. I can be an ice storm. Without me, you'd fry. Every day, I am the breath you take in. Yet you are making me sick. I am congested, off balance, polluted. You see, I am more delicate than you think. It took millions of years to get it just right. My perfect mix of gases, temperature, and weather that you enjoy. But now your cars, your factories, and dust, they have pushed me past the limit. And you wonder why my typhoons and tornadoes are more intense, more frequent. I have become unpredictable. Less rain here, a lot more rain there. Hotter summers, colder winters. I cannot even control myself anymore. Enough about me. I will show my changing self to you in your days ahead. But in the end, I'll be fine. Give me a few thousand years. I have weathered trauma before. I am not worried for myself. Look up.
I am coral. Some people think I'm just a rock, when in fact I'm the largest thing alive on this planet. I'm so big I can be seen from space. But for how long? I grew for almost 250 million years. Then humans came along, and now 1/5 of me is gone. Sure, I live at the bottom of the sea, and you might not see me that often. But you do need me. Do you realize that 1/4 of all marine life depends on me? I am the nursery of the sea. Little fish depend on me for food, and to hide from the big fish. And guess who eats the big fish? That's right, you do. I'm the protein factory for the world. Yet you raise the temperature of the ocean, so I can't live here anymore. And when big storms and tsunamis barrel through the ocean, I'm your fortress. Yet you tear me apart with dynamite and poison me with cyanide. Well, here's a crazy thought. Stop killing me.
I am the mountain. I am nature's oldest temple. My glaciers and streams provide the water you drink. My forests, your wood, your clean air. From up here, I see how you've come to treat this world. You used to recharge your body and soul in the calm of my forests. You once climbed my peaks, seeking enlightenment. Now you take what you want and contemplate only your own gain. Open your eyes while there's still time. Because there's one more thing I see clearly. The cliff you're on, and the rocks below.
Wave. I am the wave. The love child of water and wind, sun and moon. I move energy, nutrients, life. I move you. I've captured your imagination since the beginning of time. You honor me. You chase me. I am a symbol of something wild that exists in you. But lately, it's I who feel wild. Choked by your trash, overheated by your pollution. It makes me sick. It makes me lash out. Don't you know I can decimate you? What do you think I can do to your currents, your coastlines, your climate? My requirements are simple. Stop stripping the forests that keep my water clean. Stop filling the atmosphere with dead carbon. And keep your plastic to yourself. Work with me now, before it is too late. I'll keep coming. I am the wave.
I am ice. I move slowly. I keep the world cool. Well, I used to. But humans keep warming this planet. I try to warn you. I send pieces of me thundering into the ocean. You do nothing. I raise sea levels. You do nothing. It has taken you decades to notice. Perhaps I'm not so slow after all.
I am home. I give you comfort. I shelter your family. See me for who I am. Home, sweet home. I am your refuge. I am the floor that supports you. The foundation that keeps you steady. The walls that give you shelter. The roof that protects you. I am your home. If you don't take care of me, I cannot take care of you. I am the forest. I take in your pollution and give you clean air. Purify your water and protect your shores. Yet you continue to cut me down, releasing carbon into the air and heating this planet. While some of you stand with me, most of you turn your backs on me. But I am resilient. Let me grow, and we can solve your climate problem together. When one tree falls, you might not hear it. But when millions fall, I assure you, you will feel it.
I am a flower. Yes, I'm beautiful. I've heard it before, and it never grows old. I'm worshipped for my looks, my scent, my looks. But here's the thing, life starts with me. You see, I feed people. Every fruit comes from me. Every potato, me. Every kernel of corn, me. Every grain of rice, me. Me. I know, but it's true. And sometimes I feed their souls. I am their words when they have none. I say I love you without a sound. I'm sorry without a voice. I inspire the greatest of them. Painters, poets, pattern makers. I've been amused to them all. But in my experience, people underestimate the power of a pretty little flower. Because their life does start with me. And it could end without me.
Look up. There I am. I am the sky. I am a warm, protective blanket wrapped around everyone on Earth. I can bring clouds, rain, and wind. I can be an ice storm. Without me, you'd fry. Every day, I am the breath you take in. Yet you are making me sick.
Please, we have a very exciting day for you here. Already running 3 minutes late. It's my one job to keep everyone on time. So I've already failed. You are right at the end, sir. Hello. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you got your coffee. Thanks for being here. First day, first morning. Should sing happy birthday to the United Nations Environment Program. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good morning. Welcome to Stockholm. My name is Sanjan. I'm the CEO of Conservation International. And it's my pleasure today to keep everyone on time and keep this agenda tight because you all have lots and lots of things to do during this really important week. I'm really happy that we're kicking this off with this event today because I think this is the one topic that probably did not get the airing it deserved way back in 1972 when the original Stockholm meeting was held. If you look at the 26 principles that flowed out of the original meeting, while some of them did touch about finance, there were things about commodity prices, and they had a wide range of principles that came out of it, everything from nuclear weapons to wildlife trade, there was not a focus on finance. No one really asked this fundamental question, who was going to pay for it, and why would they? And that's what we're here to try to tackle, and it doesn't come at a moment too soon. Now, on behalf of the United Kingdom, parties to the Leaders' Pledge for Nature and the organizers of Stockholm 50, I thank you for being here. And as I mentioned just now, today we're going to focus on how we can transition to a nature-positive economy. This is a really important year, and Glasgow set the high bar for us. COP26 was a gathering of people who hadn't seen each other for 2-3 years, and it had the momentum that propelled us into this year. And now we're hurtling towards COP27 in Egypt. We have COP15 coming up at the end of the year. So Stockholm plus 50 comes at the right time to have this conversation about the how. How do we move capital activities towards things that are nature positive and away from things that deplete the economy, deplete nature? If you really look at what is needed for the protection of nature, at the end of the day, you have to do two things. One, obviously, you have to provide funding to support nature-positive activities. But perhaps even more importantly, you have to also find ways to divert funding from things that go towards depleting nature. We are fighting a very uneven war here. I work for a conservation organization. We're a charity, so we go ask people for money, which amazingly they give us that we then go and deploy towards conservation or the protection of nature. It is a drop in the bucket compared to what is allied against us. And I think this is a conversation to try to shift that balance, to make it a more equal, or frankly not equal, to make it a more progressive fight, if you will, to get us to a place where the things that are destroying nature are ultimately undermined themselves. So we're going to split today's event into two sessions. The first is focused on the what and the why. I think most of you probably know a lot about the what and the why. We've been thinking about the what and the why. That's what brought you into this room and what a successful transition looks like. And then we're going to have a short break, and then the second part of this will focus on the how. And I think that's going to be a really important and challenging conversation, the practical steps that everyone, government, civil society, private funders, and corporations must play in order to turn this vision into a reality. So to kick us off, it is really my great pleasure to welcome the UK Minister of State for the Pacific and International Environment, Doctor. I just made you a doctor. You might be a doctor, Lord Zach Goldsmith. You know, the reason I jumped into the doctor thing is, as an American, we rarely get to say Lord, so I just go straight to that. Now, I have one thing I do want to mention about Minister Goldsmith. You know, he and his team at DEFRA really made COP26 a nature COP. Their tireless work, his tireless advocacy for nature, really put nature on the agenda in a way that I don't think will ever be now removed from future COPs to come. It's astonishing what he's done. He's passionate, he's deeply committed to this topic, and he desperately wants to figure out how we collectively can break down the barriers and ultimately fund nature at the level that it absolutely deserves. Zach.
Doctor, where do you want me to go?
No, you're right. I think you're over there.
So are we having a discussion? Where do you want me to sit?
Good question.
Or
Sit
stand.
anywhere you want.
Okay, I'll go here.
And I guess I'll sit here.
Is that good?
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. And before we even get the first question, huge thanks to Sanjayan for hosting today, but also for the amazing work that your organization does. And you were a big part of COP26 as well. Hosted the best event with some people here, Carlos and others, the Heroes panel, as I called it. I wasn't on it. But he hosted one of the highlight events of COP26 and does great things.
It was easier doing that, Zach, because it was in the evening, and there was a lot of food and drinks available.
Yes.
And we'd had such an amazing few days that it just really came together really well. Now, we're at the different point here. We're starting this week off. So just starting, why do you feel so strongly about this? Why, of all the things that you could have done on the first day of Stockholm Plus 50, why did you want this session?
So for the same reason that your intro didn't dump a whole load of bad news on the audience, I'm assuming most people know how grave the situation is. It's hard to exaggerate the damage we're doing to the natural world. And I think everyone here knows that. And just on a human level, it's a tragedy. You hear about species being lost, ecosystems being destroyed. But it's much more than just a sad thing for us to reflect on. It is actually suicidal. Everything we have, everything we are, everything we do derives from nature, without exception. So when you start undermining natural systems, you're undermining systems on which each of us depends. And where, we are probably in this room mostly people who are one step removed from those natural systems, but there are millions of people around the world whose dependence is absolutely direct. Destroy the forests in their area, the waterfall changes, the agriculture becomes impossible, floods result. It is a very much more existential threat for them than it is to us, but it is ultimately existential for all of us. The flip side is that by focusing on nature, which we haven't done nearly enough of for the last 50 years, is that you're solving so many other problems as well. When you back nature, you're tackling climate change, you're tackling the causes of climate change, you're tackling poverty, you're tackling pandemics, which we know much more about than we did a couple of years ago. So it is, the economists use that term solution multiplier. There is no solution multiplier that even comes close to nature. And that's why I think nature has to be the focus, it has to be the priority, and we have this year to try and create this, a genuine Paris moment for nature. We have an opportunity to do so.
So lots of ways to fix nature. But the way you are focusing your efforts right now is to fix financing.
Yeah.
And when you talk about financing, you're not just talking about ODA, right? You're not talking about government-to-government assistance. You're talking about a whole suite of things that need to come together.
Yeah.
I can sort of understand why you want to take that broad approach, but can you explain a little bit more why it's extraordinarily important for this audience and for the rest of this conference to understand all the pieces of the pie that add up to fixing the finance problem with nature?
So you're right. I mean, direct finance matters, and it matters for all kinds of reasons. Donor countries have to cough up. We've got to come up with direct cash for nature, and we're doing our best to come up with that cash. But we've got to be realistic, that it's only ever going to be a drop in the ocean. No matter how successful we all are in getting governments to provide more direct cash, it's a drop in the ocean. The funding gap for nature is probably between $500 and $700 billion. We're never going to get that through direct public finance. So we've got to move the system as well. And that means, for example, tackling the subsidies. We know that around the world, the top 50 food-producing countries spend around $500, $600, $700 billion a year subsidizing highly destructive land use. So if you were to shift that money so that instead of degrading the public good, it was supporting the public good, the environment, the services we depend on, that already would come close to closing that gap. One of the things that was achieved or agreed at the G7 last week was that the donor countries would align their entire ODA portfolios with nature. In fact, that they'd go further than that. They'd become nature positive. That's $140 billion of aid every year that will contribute to the solution. But even all of that's not enough. We need to change the way conventional finance flows, and governments have a hugely important role in that. We write the rules, we don't determine how money is invested, that's a good thing, but we do create the parameters. And ultimately, until governments find a way to price pollution and waste and the use of scarce resources into the market, and until we find a way to put a proper value on nature, those things which are so valuable to everything we do, but which are not currently valued, forests are still worth more dead than they are alive on the whole. Until governments do that, in my view, we're going to be continuously moving in the wrong direction. So we need ultimately to align everything we do with nature. And that's ambitious and it's huge, but it's also unavoidable.
You know, the key word I think you used is the gap. I think when people think about that, the 700 billion, they think, well, how do we get it up to 700 billion? But if you think about it as a gap, there's two ways. One, you can raise this. The other is you can lower this.
Exactly right.
And you got to do both. And they have to be done in synchrony. Final thoughts to keep in mind as we kick off today, and anything that you want to mention about, you know, we've done a lot of work on the net zero economy. What can we apply to the net positive future, or nature positive future?
Just very, very quickly on the financing, because I just bumped into Carlos Manuel over here, who's a fantastic former environment minister for Costa Rica. He now runs the GEF. The GEF is the main funding vehicle for the 3 Rio conventions, does an incredible job. It's just gone through a successful replenishment because of the work that he's done. The UK, I'm not sure we've announced this yet, but we're putting 330 million into this replenishment, and we will continue to support you in every way we do. That is an important part of the funding story. On net zero, look, the energy transition is happening. It may not be happening fast enough, but it is happening because there is a market. In fact, the market is ahead of the politics. Solar price came down 90% since the credit crunch. But there are Teslas more valuable than car companies that have been around for nearly 100 years. Renewable investment exceeds fossil fuel investment in terms of new capacity. That stuff is happening, but the market is not yet there for nature. The incentives to destroy forests are around 40 times bigger than the incentives to protect forests. So nature has to be treated, although it's not separate from the other challenges we're facing. In terms of the challenge, the political challenge, it is separate and it needs special attention. And the last thing I wanted to say is that we can be optimistic, and you know, I surround myself with gloomy facts and figures. It's my job, and I'm sure everyone else here does too. But there is so much to be optimistic about. We know that the demand for change is there. All around the world, people want, not just young people, everyone wants change. The second is that we know what we need to do. It's not like we have to be clever and invent new things. We know what the solution is. And the third thing is that, you know, I've had a great honor and privilege as a minister of visiting countries around the world, seeing with my own eyes some examples of real inspiration. Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador. I just came back from the Republic of Congo, where there are things that are happening which absolutely are best practice. And if we could turn those things into the default, into the norm, as opposed to little islands of best practice, we would be where we need to be. So we know it is possible because it's happening. People are doing it. We've just got to move the whole system on so that those things become the kind of default position.
Thank you, Lord Goldsmith. Thank you for those great words. You're completely right. If we're seeing this happen with energy, we can clearly make it work with nature as well.
Thank you so much.
So it's time to welcome the first keynote speaker of the day. There's a growing consensus on our need to value nature, and we need to make this shift happen really quickly. What we're going to do now is listen to a quick message from the Paulson Institute. As you know, the Paulson Institute was instrumental in creating a report, working with others like the Nature Conservancy and others, to create a report that gives us a sense of what it would take, laying out a roadmap, if you will, for scaling nature financing. The Vice Chair and Executive Director of the Paulson Institute, Deborah Lair.
Minister Lord Goldsmith, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join this event on nature finance ahead of the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. I'm Deborah Lair, Vice Chairman and Executive Director of the Paulson Institute. On behalf of our Chairman, Secretary Hank Paulson, we want to thank you for all the good work that you're doing to drive the agenda for protecting nature. People might reasonably ask, why are you talking about biodiversity when there's a war in Ukraine an energy crisis, a global supply chain crisis, and a looming food security crisis? The answer is, without a healthy planet, the foundation of human civilization, we undermine our ability to tackle all other crises, and the health of our planet is in peril. We're in the midst of one of the greatest extinction events Earth has ever experienced, and the first to be driven by humans. I often hear that we must tackle the climate crisis first, and then we'll tackle biodiversity loss. This would be a mistake, and there's no time to wait. Well-intentioned policies to tackle climate change could, if not well planned, exacerbate biodiversity loss. Think of the footprint of a wind or solar farm, if not placed appropriately, that could destroy the natural habitat. And of course, biodiversity loss weakens our resilience to climate change. We must tackle the climate and biodiversity crises together and in an integrated way, and especially because the statistics about biodiversity loss are terrifying. Populations of vertebrates have declined by a staggering 68% since 1970. 90% of the world's large fish have disappeared. And today, humans, or the livestock on which we depend for food, make up 96% of the biomass of mammals on Earth. This loss is not only desperately sad, it also presents tremendous risks to human prosperity and well-being. These risks fall into two main categories: economic risk and public health risk. First, the economic risks. It's hard to quantify free goods, and that's how we price nature today. And I recognize it's very hard to put a price on nature, yet it's important we develop some type of benchmarks to demonstrate the extent of the potential challenge. Consider the threat to our already fraught food supply. The loss of pollinators alone, our bees and birds, could lead to a drop in annual agricultural output of more than 200 billion annually. Add in the non-food crops such as alfalfa, the main feed for cattle, and the impact rises to more than 500 billion a year. If we use standard financial valuation techniques to calculate the value of these assets, just like a tiny bee, it has a capital value of close to 14 trillion US dollars. To put that in context, it's equal to almost 75% of the US national income. Deforestation is another major threat to biodiversity. Many of you here are familiar with the recent research that has argued for a value as high as $600 per ton for carbon captured. Based on that estimate, the implied value of our forests for their carbon sequestration role alone is well over $100 trillion. But that's like valuing a microchip based on just its silicon. The value is significantly higher. Roughly half of the global economy, $44 trillion, is dependent on nature or the services it provides. Such estimates are helpful for demonstrating the scale of our reliance, but of course, ultimately, all economic activity depends on our having clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and a habitable climate. Second, the public health risks. There's growing evidence that biodiversity loss puts humans into contact with stressed ecosystems in ways that increase the risk of the transfer of zoonotic diseases. It's no coincidence that during the last few decades of catastrophic biodiversity loss, we've seen outbreaks of zoonotic diseases such as SARS, MERS, Ebola, and of course, COVID. In fact, 75% of emerging diseases in the last century have been transmitted from animals to humans. The International Monetary Fund expects the cost of the current pandemic to the global economy to exceed $12.5 trillion by 2024. We can't continue to maintain those costs. At the same time, nature provides us with about a third of our medicines. For example, the PCR test for COVID, which we're now all too familiar with, was created using heat-resistant enzymes originally found in hot springs in Yellowstone National Park. The last 2 years have been a stark reminder of just how damaging zoonotic diseases can be and how much we rely on nature to protect us. Added to these two risks, it's increasingly clear that our path to net zero carbon relies on a healthy biosphere and nature-based solutions. So if nature is so valuable, why are we not doing a better job protecting it? The fundamental reason is that we don't place an appropriate value on nature in our economies. There is growing evidence, as set out by Professor Dasgupta in his review into the economics of biodiversity, that we should be treating natural capital in the same way we treat other forms of capital, such as built capital, financial capital, and human capital. We should measure it, value it, and invest in it. However, the current inability of our financial systems and valuing nature means that instead we're over-exploiting it, resulting in its depreciation. In 2020, the Paulson Institute, together with our partner, the Nature Conservancy, published a report entitled Financing Nature, Closing the Global Biodiversity Financing Gap. In our report, we showed that there's a $700 billion gap between what the world spends on biodiversity conservation today and what is needed over the next decade. That's a big number, but it's also manageable. To put it in context, it's around 1% of global GDP, but that's actually less than what the whole world spends on soft drinks in just 1 year. There is a path forward, yet it does take political will. Fortunately, we're seeing glimmers of that through the good work that's being done in the United Kingdom in hosting the G7 meetings and COP26, where biodiversity was on the agenda, and by China at the CBD COP. The most enlightening finding from the Financing Nature report is that we can significantly reduce the gap by addressing just two major issues. First, we must stop subsidizing bad behaviors. Consider that annual subsidies for activities that harm biodiversity, such as the $400 billion for dirty energy consumption, are at least twice the annual capital flows towards biodiversity conservation. Here, governments must begin the politically fraught process of diverting public funds away from environmentally harmful activities and towards those that protect and sustainably manage nature. This one step alone could help close the funding gap by up to 1/2. That's with no new money, simply diverting existing funds. Second, we must integrate biodiversity risk management into financial decision-making. It's essential that we steer the trillions of planned public and private sector investments away from projects that do harm to nature towards projects that protect and restore nature. And if we can reform the harmful subsidies and integrate biodiversity risk into investment, we'll go a long way towards closing the global biodiversity financing gap without the need for new money. Even still, public sector funds alone can't cover the costs necessary. Private sector monies are definitely required. It's not an easy task to create financial assets out of birds, bees, and trees. But to realize the potential of private sector investment in nature, government must put in place the right incentives and regulatory frameworks to make it happen. However, recognizing that these changes won't happen overnight, it's vital that we explore sources of new financing or expansion of existing financing for nature. For this audience, I'd like to highlight one, the overseas development assistance. Although its contribution is relatively small, it could have a disproportionate positive impact. This assistance is politically important to developing countries in the UN negotiations and, if used smartly, could help developing countries leverage additional sources of funding and incentivize nature-positive outcomes. Commitments by donor countries to allocate a greater proportion of ODA for nature could be linked to commitments by recipients to build the technical capacity to carry out the necessary policy reforms. Before I close, I'd like to set out a few recommendations that the Paulson Institute believes would make an important difference, but most important are viable options. First, it's important to secure commitments from all countries to develop and implement national biodiversity action and financing plans to create the roadmap towards solutions. Second, we must encourage governments to audit national subsidies, enabling them to identify those most harmful to nature. Redeployment of these funds towards nature-positive subsidies is a low-cost and effective way of reform, as I mentioned earlier. Third, to take steps to align climate and biodiversity finance Donor countries have committed to reach $100 billion in climate financing, and 3 G7 countries, France, the UK, and Canada, have committed to align 30% of their climate finance for nature-based solutions. If all donor countries did that, it would generate about $25 billion per year to support biodiversity outcomes in developing countries. Fourth, we should reconsider the charters of multi-development banks to include nature financing. Just as multilateral development banks are ensuring their investments are consistent with the Paris Agreement on climate change, they should commit to ensuring their investments are consistent with the Kunming Declaration on Biodiversity and the forthcoming Global Biodiversity Framework due to be approved later this year. And finally, governments should make financing nature an essential part of their economic recovery plans in this post-COVID world. The important work being conducted by the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge are helping us to understand how. The economic and health arguments for protecting nature are compelling, yet there's an overwhelming case for preserving nature for its own sake. Nature is our greatest source of beauty, inspiration, innovation, and intellectual interest. Indeed, for everything that's good in life. In that sense, it's priceless. I wish you all a successful and productive event today, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of your discussions. Thank you for including the Paulson Institute.
Thank you, Deborah, for those great words. That was a fantastic presentation. You know, if I could just sum it up, it would be something like, stop subsidizing things that destroy nature, create markets for the value of nature, and then help mid and low-income countries make that transition in a just way. So someone who knows a lot about this, twice the Minister of Environment and Energy for Costa Rica? My note says once, maybe it's 3 times, but I know it's 3 times. 3 times the Minister of Environment for Costa Rica, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, and now the CEO of the Global Environmental Facility. Please welcome on stage, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez.
Thank you, Sanjan. It's a pleasure to be here. Yesterday, I was struck by the fact that I participated in 2 or 3 panels. And basically, I heard many times during those panels, many experts saying that we failed, we lost the opportunity, we're not doing good, we're going over the cliff for what has happened in the last 50 years. And I strongly disagree with that impression that we have failed to deliver and perform after the summit of 1972. 30 years ago, this week, I was in Rio. I was part of the youth movement in Rio. And nobody remembers that 30 years ago in Rio, 2/3 of protected areas were located in the north, and 1/3 of protected area were located in the global south, where the biodiversity is. And we all agree to cooperate, work together, and change that. Today, 2/3 of protected areas are in the global south, where the biodiversity is. 1/3 is in the north. And yes, even though we still need to do much, we're around 17% protected areas at the global level. In 1977, when I was finishing high school in Costa Rica, I remember reading 2 reports that really changed my vision and most probably my expectation on life. One report said that, World Bank report says that Costa Rica has the highest deforestation rate per capita of the planet. And then a couple of months later, a group of Costa Rican scientists came with another report in 1977 saying that Costa Rica will lose the forest by 2000. Today, 2022, Costa Rica has twice the size of the forest that we had in 1977, 100% renewable energy. We did that in the same period that the population doubled and the economy tripled. So there's a lot of good news, and if we see what Gabon is doing, and we see what many other countries are doing, I mean, I think that we have a very compelling, successful, positive story to tell. And we are really connecting the dots in terms of the system change. We're talking about the implementation gap, and just give me a second to talk a little bit on the implementation gap before, but I want to finish the positive story behind all of this. The positive story behind all of this is that there are 55 high forest, low deforestation nations in the planet. And these countries are looking on options and solutions to use their natural capital in terms of their human and economic development. And these countries are really connecting the dots as well in terms of positioning the natural capital the same way that they position the financial and human capital. Costa Rica was able to double the size of their forest and be 100% renewable energy in the electric sector because we did 5 things. 5 things that really can really work everywhere. And those 5 things are things that I have brought to the JEF. I presented in the JEF programming replenishment, and we receive a strong, big support by everybody in the JEF partnership. Let me go through the 5 good things that we need to understand. First, we need to go from negative and perverse incentives into positive ones. When I was in the law school in 1986, I did a small research about the negative impact of the agrarian reform policy, the land tenure policy, the banking policy, the agriculture policies. And let me just make a parenthesis here. Subsidies and perverse incentives is not just a challenge of the North. In the global South, it's big, huge. When we were able to begin in Costa Rica mapping and understanding all of those perverse incentives and began the political process to phasing out, deforestation went really down. So yes, Aichi target number 3, what we agree in Nagoya 2010 is in the center of what we need to address, going from negative perverse incentives into positive ones. The second thing that really worked very well was to really understand that not only the market is failing, and there's a huge market failure that is unable to fully internalize the good and bad things that we do with nature, but also we got an institutional failure. The way we have organized our agencies in the public sector has proven not to be efficient. We will never achieve our sustainability goals with the same institutional framework that in first place has created the problem that we want to solve today. When I was the Minister of Environment of Costa Rica, I was also the Minister of Energy, Mining, Water, and the Oceans. I didn't have a Minister of Energy and Mining to fight with. As a matter of fact, when I was invited to the meetings of ministers of energy of Latin America, I had a lot of ministers to fight with because most of my colleagues, ministers of energy from Latin America, with a few exceptions, most of them, they got oil and gas in their mind. This is what they were trained on. And I can tell my stories with my dear good friend, Minister of Agriculture. I mean, he is very complicated. I went through many different ministers of agriculture. I mean, we need to follow the UK experience of having in one agency agriculture and environment. Why do we divide how we manage the natural resources? Why we divide the agencies managing renewable and non-renewable natural resources? Well, the end result of that is having sectoral policies that contradict each other. And at the end of the day, we got a major problem of policy coherence. We need to understand that we need to move our institutional systems towards a landscape approach. Institutions need to go towards a landscape approach. And the final element here, which is extremely important, there will never be enough ODA to narrow the global financial gap. Costa Rica understood that, that ODA was a catalyzer for improving policies, for creating innovative financial mechanisms. In Costa Rica, I was telling the minister from Norway just a few minutes ago, Costa Rica in 1997 did the first carbon transaction with Norway. In 1997, we were ahead of the curve. You know what was the price of carbon back then in 1997? $10 a ton. You know what is the value, Mr. Minister, Lee White, how much is the value? $10. We'll never revert the rate of deforestation if we don't match, the market doesn't match the cost of opportunity of doing the wrong things that we don't want to see in the landscape. So the GEF looks into the next decade to work on helping countries being more consistent in their development policies and in mobilizing more efficiently domestic resources. If we all do what Deborah asked us to do, mobilize financial resources from all sources, and so we can be mobilizing 1% of global GDP by 2030, that will be great. Countries need to understand that it's in their very own self-interest to mobilize domestic resources more efficiently. I don't know any nation in this planet that conditions investment in health, investment in education for more ODA. So the GEF will be there leading the process to help countries narrow their domestic financial gap by supporting finance, by supporting research and development in ways by which they can mobilize domestic resources more efficiently, and ODA will be supporting that process. Thank you so much.
Manuel. This explains why often I see you speaking to yourself. You're just arguing with yourself about which hat you were wearing, whether you were the environment minister or the energy minister. I think I'm going to keep that in my mind. Carlos Manuel is doing an extraordinary job at the GEF. Naoko Ishii, who is the previous CEO of the GEF, who put us on this path, is here. And it's just really nice to see this continuity and the increasing relevance that you play in conservation and biodiversity protection. So please welcome the next speaker, former Minister of Foreign Affairs for the government of Ecuador and former UN Secretary General Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who's joining us virtually.
Greetings to all, and thank you to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs of the United Kingdom and all organizers of this dialogue on financing the transition to a nature-positive future. It is an honor to address this event on perhaps the most critical issue of our time, the need to change our economies to ensure that we, the human species, can survive and have a future. We know what is happening. The world is facing high inflation and spiraling prices for food and energy. Nature and climate risk continue to rise. And in 2022, this year, may well set a new record on extreme weather events, on hunger and migration. What does the lack of electricity, food, shelter, jobs mean to people, real people on the ground? It simply means that their very survival is under threat. To deal with these converging challenges, we need a financial system that responds to climate, nature, and people holistically. That is the task that we have today. Not to discuss the financial gap, but rather how we can shift our systems towards a nature-positive, climate-resilient, and equitable global economy. As my colleagues of the Task Force for Nature Market would say, our economy is 100% dependent on nature, and without nature, there is no economy nor life on our planet. So, in fact, what we should be discussing is how we can shape the financial system and markets to deliver nature-positive and equitable outcomes, with a simple objective of having food on our plates, clean energy at our disposal, and shelter over our heads. We need to value nature and thus create a nature-positive economy. I suggest that we frame the conversation today around valuing nature. That means underscoring the interlinkages between nature as valuable, both economically and culturally, as well as for our health and well-being as humans. After all, the risk of losing nature is too big to ignore, economically and otherwise. This very June, 50 years ago, here in Stockholm, 130 countries celebrated the 1972 Declaration on the Human Environment. This declaration has 26 principles that remain relevant today regarding science, technology, education, cooperation, accountability for sustainable development. As we discuss valuing nature in this event today, I would like to underscore Principle 2 of the Declaration, that we must safeguard nature for the present and future generations, and Principle 8, that economic and social development is essential for people and the planet. And yet, here we are, 50 years later, discussing how much money we need to stop biodiversity loss and pollution. I do not believe that it is the correct approach. It is time to make sure that businesses, consumers, the finance sectors, policymakers recognize and respond to the systemic risks associated with the loss and depletion of our Earth system. Today, we can make a contribution by setting out a vision, building blocks, and key actions for financing a nature-positive economy. And of course, not a virtual economy with numbers on the screen, a real economy with thriving forests, vigorous watersheds, oceans, and of course, healthy people. The discussion today should aim to move beyond diagnostics or forecasts into action. What is needed to develop a nature-positive, climate-resilient, and just economy? Our mission today is to explore how we can shape markets to deliver shared prosperity and regenerated ecosystems instead of further nature destruction and inequality. How can we ensure that indigenous and local communities are fully incorporated into the economic benefits of protecting nature? After all, their knowledge is absolutely critical for the implementation of emerging approaches to valuing and better managing vital natural assets. Early in my career, I had the privilege of living with indigenous peoples in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Many solutions, I have to tell you, of sustainable forest management and biodiversity conservation come from these very communities. We very much need their voices, their knowledge, their experiences to inform the decisions that we take at all levels. Our history of disregard and destruction of nature has meant that nature's bounty is often undervalued or not valued at all. Nature's decline affects all of us, and the impacts are often felt by the most vulnerable, by the very stewards of nature, farmers, local communities, indigenous peoples, and women. So what I'm trying to say is that a principles-based nature market need the right balance of innovation, power, and accountability. Today's governing institutions need to be drawn into the effective governance of nature markets, including those responsible for trade, finance, as well as those with core socio-environmental mandates. I am constantly asked if I am optimistic about the future. My answer is that it is not a question of optimism, but one of responsibility. I don't think we can afford the luxury of pessimism. It is, of course, a bleak picture, a difficult moment for humanity, but we need hope and we need resolve. We need the voices and power of people, of responsible leadership, responsible and caring politicians that think about the next generations and not the next elections. I have held many leadership positions, from being a minister to president of the UN General Assembly. What really matters are not the titles we collect, but the actions we have implemented while occupying that seat. Political will is fundamental, but our individual resolve is paramount. In addition to the socio-environmental crisis we are experiencing, I believe we are clearly dealing also
with a crisis of values. Too often, decisions are guided by greed, personal interest, and selfishness. What we need is solidarity, empathy, generosity. Basically, the concept of radical love for humankind and for nature. That's what gathers us here today. So thank you, and I wish you a very productive meeting.
I'm so glad Maria brought in the issue of indigenous peoples and local communities and really framed it as a discussion about inclusivity and equity, which I think it ultimately is. All right, so now let's do exactly what she said. Let's discard the luxury of pessimism, or I would say luxury of apathy, and let's go into optimism, but let's also move from discussion into action. So it's my real pleasure to welcome 5 panelists to the stage. I'm not going to give you a long bio because we're really pressed on time. These are folks who are real experts on this. They have deep knowledge. They have dirt under their fingernails. I'm sure, Lee, there's dirt under your fingernails from the Gabon rainforest there. But all of them have really done the work, the hard work, to be here on the stage. So I'm really excited to hear from them. So please welcome on stage Gabon's Minister of Forest and Environment, Lee White, Canadian Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, Executive Director of Science-Based Target Network, Erin Billman. Lee, why don't you start over there, and then let's just... and I'm going to change things around. I'm going to sit over here. Keep it going. Task Force for Nature Markets member, Vian Sharif. And finally, my friend, WWF CEO, Marco Lambertini. Marco, I switched it up a little bit because I think it's better to put you all on center stage rather than me. All right. First question to the guy who's probably traveled the furthest to be here. That goes to... No, well, yeah, that's going to be a toss-up, isn't it? I'm going to say it's going to be Lee. So we're going to go to you, Lee, particularly from the Global South, particularly from Gabon's perspective. What does it really mean to you? What does it mean to the people of Gabon to transition to a nature-positive economy? And what's the single biggest barrier to us doing this? And please don't say money. You could say anything.
I think that it's about political vision. It's about engagement. Gabon is nature positive. We've seen the rainforest elephants, the forest elephants decimated over the last 2 decades by poaching. We've lost 75% of the forest elephants. But in Gabon, our elephants are up 50%. Because we came to Stockholm 50 years ago, and a couple of years later, we created our first ever ministry dedicated to environment. We went to Rio, and a year later, we passed our first environment law. You know, there have been 5 decades of strong environmental leadership in Gabon. We all are in awe of what Costa Rica has done, bringing their country back from the brink. They went down to 20% forest cover, and they're almost back up to 60% today. In Gabon, our battle is to maintain the 88% forest cover that we have, to maintain the incredible biodiversity that we have. You know, I was amazed to hear that if we all stopped drinking soft drinks, we could solve the biodiversity financing gap. And I think of Coca-Cola, which was made from the coca leaf from South America and the cola nut from Africa. But how much of the profits from Coca-Cola went into South American and African countries? So I think what we're showing in Gabon is that if you have political leadership, you can do it. You know, we're the most climate-positive country on Earth. We're absorbing more than double of Sweden's annual carbon emissions into our rainforests. And, you know, when I see my president giving speeches at these sorts of fora, and he says that, I don't hear the room sort of erupting in applause. I almost feel like people feel like he's lying, or but we're showing you can buck the trend. The HFLD countries, high forest, low deforestation countries, about 10 of which are carbon positive, are showing the way forwards. And in the post-Glasgow world, I think that's what we need to be aiming for: is carbon positive, biodiversity positive, nature positive countries. And you know, nature is what keeps us healthy, keeps us sane.
Right.
Gives us a quality of life, and so we're all fighting for that.
Thank you, Lee. Just to remind our panelists, you have about 3 minutes each. I know it's a very little amount of time, but just keeping it to that. I want to turn to Minister Guilbeault of Canada. So it's fair to say that you've spent a fair amount of your career being an activist, pushing from outside of government. So now you're in there. What is it like? But more importantly, what does it really mean to you to align government spending with a nature-positive goal? And you know, my same question in some ways that I put to Lee, what's stopping us from doing it? Just big business, big lobby groups?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I agree with Dr. Goldsmith. I mean, sorry, Lord Goldsmith. I don't even have your excuse because we're a member of the Commonwealth.
I think some university should give him a doctorate. I'm sure it's in the works right now.
Yeah, I'll work on it in Canada for sure. But I do think that we are at a moment where massive changes are starting to happen. And we're seeing it on the climate side. We're looking at investments in renewables, clean tech, surpassing investment in the fossil fuel sector, and I think we're starting to see the same type of changes on the biodiversity and nature side. What we are doing in Canada, first, we're investing massively in the protection of our nature and our biodiversity, and unfortunately, unlike Gabon, we haven't had 50 years of consistency doing that. It's been very uneven in Canada, unfortunately. But over the past few years, things have started to change for the best. So between 1992 and 2015, Canada had not even protected 2% of its coastlines and oceans. We're at almost 15% now, and we did that since 2015. Our goal is to be 25%, to conserve and protect 25% of our lands and oceans by 2025, and 30 in each category by 2030. And what we've started doing is really starting to. I mean, first, we've seen how government money has been transformational in the energy and clean tech sector. Not because it's mostly government money that has led to those transformation, but because it is government money that has attracted investors and private sector capital so that we could have those transformations. And I think the same is true of conservation and biodiversity. We hear in many of the projects that we work, even if the government is not putting the most money, the fact that the government is at the table lends credibility to projects, and then can attract private sector capital, philanthropy, as well. So government have a really important role to play. And also, as many have said, in redirecting some of the subsidies or some of the investments that we're doing. So in Canada, we've doubled the amount of money we're investing in nature-based solutions. We're using money that would have been used in the past for concrete and steel and infrastructure to invest in nature-based solutions to adapt to climate change. And we're doing that internationally as well, since we've committed that at least 20% of our climate finance would be dedicated to nature-based solutions.
Great. I do love the fact that you're setting these goals for 2025 and 2030, and not just 2030, given sort of general political, time in office. Having those intermediate goalposts are incredibly important. So, Erin, turning to you, how can we ensure that the ideas of a nature-positive economy, which you've heard about today, is based in good science?
It's an incredibly important question, and I'm representing how we can measure it for companies and cities, being the kind of actors in the system that have the most agency in the space. And so we have a lot to learn here from the climate space in terms of accurately translating global goals, the Paris Accord, to what that means for a company or a city to set a target that it's in line with that goal based on the best available science, and that we can measure progress. And we're taking the learning from that and applying it to nature, because we can't be addressing climate in silo. We need that integrated approach. And when we're talking about nature, it's land, freshwater, oceans, and the biodiversity therein. We have an incredible collaboration with partners including CI, WWF, Capitals Coalition. We're working with the Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures to basically have two sides of the coin. One is equipping companies and cities to be able to set measurable targets, and then on the other side, to report and disclose their progress there. And we're seeing real examples of that level of engagement today. We have 100 companies with over $4 trillion of market cap that are working right now on mapping and assessing their impacts and dependencies on nature. There's a long curve of understanding that needs to come there, because many companies today don't know where they are sourcing material, for instance. And that's step one in terms of what do you depend on in those natural resources in order to get the materials you need for your company. So I see those as some of the fundamental building blocks that are needed to make sure that companies and cities are doing their part, and that will help with the flow of private finance.
And companies are really coming to you for that. I mean, there's a huge demand.
Yes.
I would imagine.
There is.
Right now. That's a really good big transition from, thinking about what this looked like a few years ago, or 10 years ago, where it was kept at arm's length, to now really feeling like they are demanding our attention and the services that, for example, you can provide.
Yeah, I think the most important point here is we talk so much about the 30 by 30. This is about the 70%.
Great point.
And making sure that the working lands are working for a nature-positive economy.
Yeah, because the 30 alone won't be sufficient, won't survive.
No.
Yeah. Vian, let's come to you. We hear a lot about the economic risk of losing nature, but obviously this audience is also interested in the upside of the value created by building new markets for nature. Tell us a little bit about that.
Of course, and perhaps I could build on your point, Erin. It's an interesting moment for us right now, and I think I'm one of perhaps a handful of private sector people in the room, so a great privilege to be with you all. Why is this different today from where we were 50 years ago? And I'll give you 3 good reasons. One is that awareness is greater than ever before, thanks in part to the work of the ministers around the room, Lord Goldsmith, finally breaking down the silos between climate and nature. These are 2 sides of the same coin. We can't achieve one without restoring the other. And everyone is talking about it. Secondly, we have regulation. We have bodies like the EU, we have Japanese regulation, we have UK regulation looking to ask companies to start to think about their nature footprint. That is unprecedented, and I've been working this for quite a long time. What I'm starting to see is a massive acceleration in demand for the sorts of tools you've been mentioning. I was in a room the other day with around $6 trillion worth of private investment capital around the table. They are demanding tools to understand their nature risk, their nature footprint, and that is something I have never seen before. It's unprecedented. The final thing, which will make this different, is technology. Technology today means that we can achieve the sort of radical transparency we have never been able to achieve before. We're seeing unprecedented flows into environmental, social, and governance funds. Some $53 trillion worth of investment is being made. The decisions are being made using some kind of ESG metric. We want to move that to $120 trillion worth of investment capital. That's our global capital markets mainstreaming nature consideration. And that is possible because of all the data that we have available, which means that a company can start to understand where its operations are located. You can start to overlay geospatial inputs. We're building on the shoulders of giants from UNWCMC, IUCN, CI, TNC, incredible information alongside the sorts of disclosures that are being mandated by the Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures, which means that the investment opportunity Once we understand risk, businesses will want to offset that risk or mitigate that risk or at least be accountable to their investors who are asking them questions about how they're investing their money. Which means that we have an unprecedented opportunity. We're at the birth of a new asset class in nature markets.
Yeah, and that was really, really helpful. Coming to you, Marco. So WWF has been leading on nature positivity for, well, as long as I can remember. Certainly as long as I've been in conservation. You personally have taken this on and have become, really instrumental in helping all of the other conservation organizations sort of come together around this topic. Break it down for us. What are the key building blocks that are required to make this transition, and at this scale?
Sanjay, thank you so much, and everyone for being here. So first of all, let me say it is absolutely amazing how the concept of nature positive has been embraced by governments, by businesses, let alone civil society. But nature positive needs to be embraced for what it is. It is a vision, it is an aspiration, it is even a slogan, handy and clear, communicable, but actually more than anything, nature positive has to be a global goal, measurable, time-bound, a global goal that, like carbon neutral and net zero emissions for climate has done to the energy sector, nature positive needs to disrupt other sectors that today are driving nature loss. The big five: agriculture, fishing, infrastructure, forestry, mining. So it is a global goal, let's not forget that. We use it sometimes with a lot of license of in communication terms, but actually it is a global goal, and we need that global goal to be codified somewhere, because what's happening to the market, to the energy market, the disruption that the Paris Agreement, carbon neutrality, net zero by 2050 has done to the energy market is that today 70% of investment in energy, new investment in energy, is towards renewable. We need to see that shift in the markets as well in agriculture and fishing and so on and so forth. Nature positive agriculture, nature positive fishing, nature positive infrastructure. That's what we need to see. And thanks to the science-based targets, companies can, having nature positive as the kind of the top of the architecture of the nature positive economy, they can actually translate the global goal into specific targets that address the footprint of each specific company and the sustainability of each specific supply chain. So I want to make that point quite strongly, because as nature positive as an aspiration is now taking roots, we actually have to make sure that it's converted into a proper global goal, embraced hand in hand with carbon neutrality and net zero emissions, embraced by the whole world. We have the opportunity to do that through the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Hopefully this year, it's been postponed now for 3 years almost, and that will signal to markets the need for the transformation that was mentioned earlier by several speakers. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, connecting to the topic of today, we need more direct investment in finance from ODA, from market-based mechanisms, but also we need, most of all, a real systemic change in the financial flows, in the way finance is supporting the economy today. That can be done if we really use carbon neutrality, nature positivity as the two compasses that we're going to use in navigating sustainable future.
Yeah, two compasses that both disrupt but also create something new. Opportunities that are both time-bound and measurable. I think that's a really important point that you raised. So there's amazing people in the audience, as you know. You are all amazing. You're all here for a reason. I'd like to invite a few folks who are here to give us a quick intervention or a reflection on what you've heard from this great panel. And I really are going to press to keep it to 2 minutes apiece, just because of time. I'm so sorry, there's lots to do here. So first I will ask Senator Sherry Rahman of Pakistan to give a 2-minute intervention. And I think there's a mic going around. Joe? There's a mic coming to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
First of all, absolutely compelling pieces and earlier speeches. I'm most impressed by Costa Rica's complete reset of their nature economy. And I think that what we're looking at is a story of real gloom and doom from the global south, from the vantage of a country like Pakistan, which is actually in the front lines of literally a 1.5 degree world or even a 2 degree world. And we look at climate intervention still not as a future that we need to protect or a present that we need to conserve. Now, climate and biodiversity and pollution, the triple crises are not in the mindset or the thoughts or aspirations for a public demand. There's a niche demand. There'll be young people who are passionate about what we can do to save our futures, but really there's a sense that we are having to make transitions, and very expensive ones, as polluters under 1%. Our emissions are under 1% of global pollution emissions, but we don't even have the policy tools, and many countries don't have the policy tools and frameworks that we're talking about here to even gather the data, to even do the nature capital accounting that is so necessary for making these transitions. So I think it's very important for us to listen, make exchanges, but understand that there is a huge gap too. The global south is fighting on the front lines of 51 degrees centigrade cities today, where you can fry an egg on the pavement. And we have squared our focus. Attention is now focusing. We're going to be water scarce very soon. So these are multiple food and water insecurity crises. They're compounded by all the anthropogenic activities globally that have been made. But we are now, well, also seeing ourselves as dumping grounds for plastics, for critical marine pollution. And the scatter is very great. The scatter is so great that we're wondering that while rich countries celebrate their green transitions, their clean energy outcomes, so hearing about Costa Rica is really a shot in the arm. Those fossil fuels, those sunset economies are being transitioned into countries like Pakistan, which really can't afford any better. We are in an energy crisis as we speak. So if we are to make any such clean intervention and let our children go to school in the winter when we have a 5th season now from crop burning, both next door in India and in Pakistan and from other pollutants, we have to also not just upgrade our own ambitions and locate responsibility within our own governments, but also make a case, and I think a powerful case can be made for building linkages with other countries and for seeking, I wouldn't say restitution or repairs, but really the capacity and the financial huge shifts of climate colonialism that we live with today need to happen right now. For us, we are looking already at we are living in a 1.5 degree world. We're not looking forward to it or trying to avert that crisis. We're in it here and now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman. Next, I would like to invite Assistant Secretary Monica Medina of the United States. Hi, Monica.
Thanks, Sanjan. And good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be here, and I want to say how inspired I am by all the remarks we've heard so far. Just a couple of points, because I know I'm held to 2 minutes. The first thing I want to say is that the U.S. government is here to listen, to try to be a real contributor to this entire story on nature. And we're funding nature as part of our work in climate and in development. And it's a bipartisan activity. This is not something that is seen as at least yet, partisan in our government. So we're very proud of our national parks. It's part of our heritage, and we have made the pledge of 30% of our lands and waters to be protected by 2030. And we spend billions on our own parks, and we hope they're an example for others in the world. But that's not enough. We've increased our contribution to the GEF to $600 million, which is a 10% increase, and we've increased our funding for adaptation and resilience by 6 times as part of an $11 billion pledge for climate finance. So we are trying to do our part, and I understand that we need to do more. The second thing I want to talk about is changing the system and the way that we're trying to develop new accounting mechanisms to actually do what everyone's talked about, to try to really understand the gap and make people pay for the destruction of nature that is being caused by all the activities that we've just sort of assumed we could do without ever having to pay for them. There's this phrase in the US, there's no free lunch. There should be no free nature anymore. I think we have to think about positivity because that sounds great, but we have to really actually make people pay for the nature, for the things that they're taking, that they're using in order to benefit. So we are working hard to come up with a real nature-based accounting system. And on our Earth Day in April, we announced that the US government would be beginning to account for nature. And of course, we know there are people who pay. You know, we talk about it being free, but it's not really free. We know indigenous peoples, disadvantaged and marginalized communities, women, all pay the price. So now there should be no more free nature, no more free riding off the people who have who paid the price all this time. And I'll just end by saying I'm optimistic because unlike finite, non-living resources, nature can regenerate. If it's alive, it can be regenerated. I think about the elephants. I think about the forests in Costa Rica. I think about the fisheries. And I'll say, last but not least, right now at the WTO in Geneva, there is an important negotiation going on about fisheries subsidies. And every minister in this room should be thinking about whether or not they're willing to give up those fish subsidies that are so hurting our oceans everywhere. It allows for strip mining the oceans, and we could stop that right now. In the next 2 weeks, that negotiation will conclude. And if your government's there, I hope you will join our government in trying to end those fisheries subsidies right now. And that would be a great down payment on nature and biodiversity.
Yeah, great point on rebalancing that gap. Next to Cabinet Secretary Tobiko of Kenya.
Thank you so very much. Quite inspired by what I have heard from my colleagues and those who have intervened from the floor. 2 or 3 issues. One, I hear this discussion as if nature is different and separate from humanity. That human beings are something else from nature. That's not true. We are part of nature. We are created from nature, soil, the organism. And when we go back to nature. I think that message needs to come out very clear. It's not really that we must conserve and protect nature out of sympathy or mercy. No, it's not a choice that we have. I think that really needs to come out. The second point is nature, just like ourselves, it's a living thing. It's not some object. It's a living thing, and it has rights, or should have rights. In the same manner as we talk about the rights of human beings to a clean and safe and healthy environment. So too, nature has and should have that right. And if we are talking about global goals, we must also likewise recognize globally, regionally, and nationally, within our legislation, the right of nature, distinct from, by itself, of itself. That's a second point. The third point, and it arises also, is I think what Professor Lee says, political will. And we need greening of not just fixing the financial system, the accounting systems. We need to fix our minds, our hearts. And particularly, and Carlos, I think, mentioned about the challenges he had when he was minister with energy and mining. Mm-hmm. How about treasuries? I don't know whether our colleagues from national treasuries are here. That's a challenge every Minister of Environment has in their pushing for budget is a nightmare. In our national assemblies and so on and so forth. So we need also to green the hearts and the minds of those who, including the corporates and so on and so forth. And finally, and this again arises out of the point about the right of nature, the crime of ecocide. You see what is happening now in Ukraine? Rightly so. We are all terrified and horrified by the destruction and the mass atrocities. How about that I do not hear anyone talking about crimes of ecocide being committed there? So for us to be able, then we need to elevate nature to that universal position so that those who are responsible for wanton massive destruction of nature are also liable and punishable at international or in international law. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Tobiko. I know Kenya has played an incredible role both in creating markets for carbon, but also in really creating a nature-based economy. Next to my dear friend Carlos Eduardo Correa of Colombia. Minister Correa, a quick intervention, sir.
Well, thank you, Tanyang. 1 minute. Colombian government defined the natural capital the most important strategic asset for natural sustainable development. So we have challenges, as just Marco was saying, to be carbon neutral, but to be nature positive. And now we need goals, Sanyan. We have challenges, but we need to define goals, see, to achieve. And then how we're going to finance those goals. I think we need bigger scale projects in nature. So we have to invest a lot in research and development, but very fast, very quick, because we need to do it fast, and that's why it's so important to have COP15 this year. Yeah. And just bringing some words from Monica about High Ambition Coalition, Lord Goldsmith. We need to work hard on the High Ambition Coalition, the 30 by 30. You know, we're working together, all together, Conservation International or WWF, all our friends, and doing the 30 by 30 8 years before. So in Colombia, we decided to do it in the next 2 months. We will have the 30 by 30 this year. So it will be the 30 by 22. Thank you, Sanya.
Thank you. Thank you. And as all of you know, Minister Correa and President Duque in Colombia has been an extraordinary partner in this effort and really has just shown the way for this high ambition when it comes to protecting nature and people, as you well pointed out, Secretary Tobiko. Minister Ida of Norway. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to start by echoing every word that my brother Kyriako Tobiko just said, that we are nature. And it's not only that we have to reset our partnership with nature, we have to really understand in our minds that we are part of it. And we just agree that even ministers of finance is a part of nature. So I think those points are well taken. This is an excellent panel, and thanks to Lord Goldsmith, Zach, and everyone who brought us together. Honestly, the starting point is terrible. We've lost too much time. But I'm very optimistic by the degree to which nature is now rapidly growing in the global attention and catching up with climate, because thank God climate is now very high on not only heads of state and government, but also CEOs' minds. For too many years, the nature biodiversity was climate's little brother in a sense, but now nature is up there and coming up there. I think what the COP26 set a very good starting point. It was also a nature COP. We're moving into COP15 on biodiversity. That has to be a Paris moment. And UNEA, where many of us were a few months ago, also finally introduced the concept of nature-based solutions into UN language. And for many years we heard we couldn't say that because it's not agreed language. Well, now it is, so now we can say it in a UN setting. So that actually helps us a lot to move ahead here. And then we need to understand, as has been very eloquently said, the two are heavily interrelated, but they are not the same. You cannot solve one at the expense of the other. You have to address both where they connect and where the answers are the same, and where they diverge and where you have to make sure that you don't undermine biodiversity in the quest to solve the climate crisis. So that's a really important debate. My main point here is that maybe what makes me most optimistic is not only the increased focus from governments, of which we are a part, and we have, as it was said earlier, we have the history of the earliest sort of connection with a biodiversity-rich country, Costa Rica, from 1997 at the price of $10, interestingly, and significant investments in the Congo Basin, Indonesia, the Amazonas, and so on. But also we're seeing that companies are now coming on board and not only contributing money to projects, but actually trying to make sure that their own value chains are much more aligned. And that's, I think, a really positive development. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, $1.4 trillion, the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, is now putting biodiversity disclosure. You're demanding from the 10,000 companies it owns globally that they actually declare a policy of more sustainable use of nature, that they disclose it, that they adhere to high standards, and that, while I'm very proud of what we do on the public side, I mean, that actually dwarfs whatever we do, that really send that very strong signal in the investment community. And they're not alone. Several companies, as was said, and those of us who were in Davos last week, I haven't heard so much about nature capital, the value of nature, the need to price the externality of diversity loss, but also to recognize the value of an intact nature in a business-oriented setting ever, as we heard now. So something is moving, and I think what this panel contributes to is a general quest to lift biodiversity and nature up where it belongs. And the starting point there has to be that we're all part of nature, even ministers of finance and even CFOs and CEOs of large companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Eide. And Norway really has been on the forefront of
can I just take a few seconds? I would like to congratulate Espen and the Norwegian delegation at UNEA, who launched us on the negotiations on path to the first internationally legally binding treaty on plastic pollution. Congratulations, and thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you.
If I may also just add one thing. If you are sure that this is going to be a Paris moment, give the business community a Paris moment. You have it in your hands.
We have one more speaker in this lineup. I'd like to invite the Vice Minister from Costa Rica, Christian Guillerme Fernandez. And I think you're relatively new to your post.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm renewed as a Vice Minister. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for this interesting panel. First of all, I'm going to be very concrete. First of all, I'm very happy. What changed from 50 years ago is that now we are listening a little bit the indigenous people that they were saying since the beginning, we are nature. And this is the change of paradigm. This is the first. The second one is we need to change. I'm going to focus on the financing because I'm the first of the class as a Costa Rican, This is, everybody's mentioned Costa Rica, that we have done very well, but at the end of the day, we still have a lot of problems to reach the financing for this change of paradigm. We had a very successful history of exporting human talent. My both colleagues, Carlos Manuel and Andrea, they are now appointed at a very high level senior officials in a very important positions, but we still have a lot of problems. What is the main challenge that we are facing now with the developing banks? Developing banks have to change the paradigm. We are living extraordinary moments, but we have the same ordinary means. And this is something that we need to change. And this is the first point. The second one is the private sector. for sure, we agree that we need more involvement of the private sector and to solve the problem of the gap, the financing gap. But in 50 years, we're going to have a global north very clean and very healthy, and a south which is going to be dirty. This is the real challenge that we are facing now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel. I really appreciate it. I'm going to just have you stay on stage briefly here because just in the interest of time. So to close out the session, really huge pleasure to welcome onto stage a very, very special guest, Ellie Goulding, musician, activist, UN Goodwill Ambassador. The reason my wife wanted to come with me to Stockholm, my 3-year-old daughter goes around humming Love Me Like You Do. So, you know, it's on my playlist as well. Ellie, please, come on stage, give us an...
Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests. God, so in awe. Thank you so much to the UK government and the Leaders Pledge for Nature, and to Stockholm Plus 50 for inviting me to be here. It's an honor. But most of all, thank you so much for your commitment to this process. I just want to say how much I respect all of you for your vision and your incredible work. I'm honestly in awe and I'm so inspired. My name's Ellie, and when I'm not in a studio or on a stage, I'm often thinking about and worrying about nature, and it's usually around it's usually around about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., which is really not ideal. And I don't think I've ever not cared about nature. I don't think I've ever not cared about nature.
So this is what's doing it.
Oh, was it me? Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's just
It was
magic.
my belly. And from a really young age, I've realized that somehow my fate and everyone's fate on this planet is inextricably entwined with that of nature, with the fate of flora and fauna and fungi. And I've always somehow known that these are the life-sustaining ecosystems that give us everything. And as Secretary Tavico said, we are nature. And growing up in very rural England, I'm so fortunate that this connection comes really easily to me. And while I don't come from a typically privileged background, I came to realize that this relationship gave me such a wealth as great as any other. And in fact, this connection between the fate of nature and our own is the only reason I guess the only reason I'm here, which sounds a lot, but it really is, and the reason I'm here and able to talk to you guys now, because it really does break my heart to think that young people, we haven't talked about much today actually, a demographic that now includes my 1-year-old, oh my God, he's 1 year old, he's 1, could grow up without that kind of relationship to nature that I was so lucky to have. And that's bad enough, but we all know it's much more than that. And as we continue to undermine and erode natural systems that provide us with everything we have and everything we need, the lives of millions and millions of people will be turned upside down, and it's, as we all know, it's already very much happening right now. And we just can't afford to let that continue. I also grew up benefiting from the work of the United Nations Environmental Programme and all the satellite and complementary organizations that have made the protection of nature an international issue. On this 50th anniversary, I think it's so important to look at what's already been achieved, actually. Unprecedented global treaties on ozone, plastic, and soon on the high seas. No country, no business, no leader, and no individual can swerve their responsibility to step up to the nature and climate crisis. But we know we just can't fight for protection. We have to fight to restore and regenerate what we've already messed up a lot, destroyed, as we've heard this morning. And currently, as you all know, the data is terrible. the picture's bleak. Current extinction rates are already 100 to 1,000 times higher than average over the past several million years. As you know, they're accelerating. 1 million species are at risk from extinction. I hate that this has all become normal things to hear. That's awful. And global capital accounts show that from 1990 to 2014, almost 90% of countries have seen declines in their natural capital per capita. And worse still, this destruction seems locked in by design in that the top food-producing countries spend $700 billion a year subsidizing the destruction of nature. And this is just mind-blowing, but it's kind of become normal, I think, to us to hear these things. But this is governments using public money, our money, to degrade the public good that we all rely on, and it just makes no sense. We end up feeling as if we're bystanders in the unprecedented destruction of natural systems. But what I've heard in this room and in this movement is that we needn't be bystanders. I feel like we hear this, like it's a golden minute, like a short window of extraordinary opportunity that we have, well, that you have, to flip this. And by putting nature at the heart of decisions, the capital investment that drives our economy can be put to work to underpin a renewal and regeneration of the biosphere. Rather than hastening destruction, we invest in natural capital and we stop the decline and crash of species and habitats. And in this room, this is what everyone's working towards, and I find it amazing. I find it so inspirational. It's incredible. So people outside of this room need to hear that too. So I'm talking about the future generations and the people that I perform to, lots of very enthusiastic and dedicated fans. And they're young and they're so desperate to hear of news of a stable planet. And as I said, they're not in the room today with us. And to be honest, they're always held at arm's length from meetings like this, always. And they're excluded by the jargon and technical negotiations. And we need to do more to explain what we're doing here and what the plan is. We need to involve them in the green economy and green economics with an effort and scale of outreach that's never been done before. Nature recovery and regeneration needs to be financed, but it doesn't need to be co-opted or taken from them, because they need to own this process too. And it is a lot to balance, admittedly, as I say it. There's huge pressures that all of you I know are dealing with, and the geopolitical and economic circumstances that we find ourselves grappling with, already being cited in some quarters as reasons to row back on promises made on the climate and nature crisis. And we might call this the swerve as those in power start making noises about other priorities. And it's a retreat and it's not grounded in any logic or data. And the truth is there, and we all know this in this room, that there's only one way forward, and that's to address the climate and nature crisis head-on by bankrolling nature rather than its destruction. And that requires so much courage and so much commitment that I've already seen here. It's just mind-blowing. And it means I can report back to young people, to the people that I represent, I feel like, in my music and what I do as a performer. And I can tell them, and feel like I can tell them truly with confidence, that you are prioritizing their future and my son's future and all of your children's future. So I thank you so much, I really do, and I look forward to seeing you for the next session where theory is turned into a plan of action, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you so much for being here with us. So we're coming to the close of this first session. Let me see if I can sort of try and sum up in like 30 seconds. You know, there are very few things that are true in this world that you can actually stand and say, these are truisms. This is really true. One is what you reminded us, that come Stockholm plus 50, come Stockholm plus 100, when, you know, your son might be up here on stage and my daughter might be here in the audience, they're not going to look back and forgive us if we don't get this right, because we have the knowledge. We have the ability in terms of what we're doing. Countries are showing the way, ministers are showing the way, civil society is showing the way, companies are taking a lead. So all the pieces are there. It's now asking, well, how do you put the pieces together? And I was going to say to create that revolution, but I love your word, Ellie, which is create the swerve. And that's the right word. It's not a revolution, it's a swerve. The second thing that I think is truly true is that nature tomorrow will be more valuable than it is today. I am 1,000% sure of that. And if that's the case, surely there must be a way to create a system whereby that value is actually recognized and flows to the people who are on the front lines of conservation, the people who need it the most. So I think we're off to an amazing start, enormous amount of positivity. I have to admit, when I first came up here, I thought, this is a big, big ask, creating a revolution. And Andrew was like, that's what I'm talking about, a revolution. And it is. It is a big deal to ask for making the swerve. And it's not just about ODA, and it's not just about companies. It's about all the pieces that need to come together in order to rebalance that gap. You can bring one side down, you can bring the other side up. But I think we're off to a great start. Thank you, Zach, for pulling us all together. Thank you to all the ministers and vice ministers and all the dignitaries who are here and participated. And thanks so much to this great panel. Thank you. So 30-minute break, and we're back at 11 o'clock to deal with the how.
We'll be starting again in 2 minutes if you can start to take your seats. Thank you.
Okay, folks, if we can take our seats, grab a little coffee, we'll get going with the second part of the agenda. Plenty of chairs over here in the front row that our previous speakers were occupying, so come on up if you'd like. Thanks for getting back. So in the morning, in the first session, we obviously heard about the why and the challenges as well as some of the opportunities. And, you know, as I said, I left that part of the morning feeling more optimistic about what was possible, but also reminded of the realities that we're facing. Taking a U-turn or a swerve, as Ellie put it, is not easy to do, and what really we're talking about is re-engineering everything that currently puts us where we are. I mean, my own life, how I got here, where I'm eating tonight, all of those things are fundamentally affected by nature and the nature-destructive economy that we have essentially created for ourselves. So it isn't going to be easy, and as Minister Rahman reminded me, you know, we just can't be all happy talk. It cannot only be examples from the Costa Ricas, the Gabons, the Colombias of the world, countries that have made this leap or on the pathway to making the leap. We also have to deal with the realities of other countries that are in a much more perilous situation. South Asia, Southeast Asia is a whole nother world. I'm from Sri Lanka. originally, and you know the challenges that Sri Lanka is really facing right now, which is still shocking to me, because if there's one country that could emulate, Costa Rica in Asia, it would be Sri Lanka. And I'm stunned that even despite all of that, if Sri Lanka can't make the transition, then imagine the challenges in Bangladesh, imagine the challenges in Pakistan or India, where populations are higher and the impact of climate change just far more real. Not real, I would say, that's not the right word, far more present, right? Far more present. So now we're going to move into the how, which understandably will be a more difficult conversation to have. Because we don't have all the answers yet. But to kick us off, we're going to have a pioneer in green financing, Ms. Bai Yunwen. Ms. Bai Yunwen is the Vice President of the Institute of Finance and Sustainability. She will share why central banks and regulators are taking nature loss seriously and how financial systems can affect change at scale. We're going to try and do this live, so we're going to rely on a connection here. It's not a pre-recorded video. Ms. Bai, I hope you can hear us. I hope the connection is okay. We can certainly see you, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. My name is Bai Yunwen, working with Institute of Finance and Sustainability, short as IFS. IFS is a China-based think tank committed to promote a zero-emission future through green finance approaches. Let me start by thanking the organizer for inviting me to join this important event. Given the theme of this session, I will talk about the recent progress advanced by NGFS and Inspire study group, and then briefly touch upon how China has been approaching this issue. As mentioned, that climate change and biodiversity losses are common global challenges that are closely linked in terms of the attribution and the solutions. And this must be addressed together to strengthen synergy. Focusing on climate risk without considering nature would lead financial institutions to underestimate risk within their portfolio, which might further impact the wider financial system. At present, the financial community has not yet recognized this potential impact on biodiversity of their investment and the dependency of their investment on ecosystem services. In this context, a joint study group on biodiversity and financial stabilities was launched about 1 year ago by the central banks and the supervisor network for greening financial system, short as NGFS, and the research network called Inspire. The NGFS brings together 89 central banks and the supervisors at the global level. I had the honor to assist Dr. Ma Jun to join this study. Ma Jun is a former chief economist of the China's central banks, and he is also one of the 2 co-chairs to this study group, together with Professor Nick Robin from LSE. The study set out the link between the biodiversity loss and the macroeconomic and the financial system. The key message of the newly released report is that biodiversity loss is a source of financial risk, and addressing this risk is a part of the central bank and the regulators' mandate. This is the first time, actually, that central banks and the prudential supervisory authority recognize the potential for biodiversity loss to strengthen the stabilities of the financial system that they oversee. Actually, there has been some good practice at the central bank and the regulatory level. For example, last year, the central banks of the Netherlands and France have conducted assessment of the dependency and the impact of their financial institution on biodiversity. And the Brazilian central bank is strengthening existing prudential regulation of financial risk. As I'm from China, for China, we have been working on establishing green financial system since 2016, when the green finance guideline issued by People from China and other 6 ministries. These systems include 4 key elements for developing green finance, namely taxonomy, disclosure, financial products, and the policy incentives. Within the current green finance taxonomy, there are over 200 types of projects that are serving the broader environmental and the climate objective. but among them, about 20 items can be classified as nature-positive projects, including reforestation, supporting nature parks, ecological restoration, as well as supporting those sustainable agroforestry and fishery, etc. The inclusion of nature-positive project into the taxonomy is very, very important because it automatically translates into regulatory requirements of reporting of such activities to the central bank and the banking regulator. And these projects will be qualified for certain policy incentives. Several local governments in China has offered incentives such as interest subsidy and guarantee to those projects if they are on the green taxonomy. Last October, at the first phase of COP15 in Kunming, China Banking Association also issued a joint declaration on behalf of the over 36 Chinese financial institutions, calling for further action by developing bank strategy to strengthen biodiversity conservation, managing and disclosing biodiversity-related risk. Currently, also the People Bank China has also started to pay attention to biodiversity. That's a good news. They entrust the China Green Finance Committee set up a study group to conduct the research and the piloting project, try to explore how to measure the biodiversity impact of the investment project, how to design the reporting framework, how to improve and refine the biodiversity-related taxonomy, and how to promote innovative green finance products for nature. Looking forward, there are still lack of regulation and specific policy incentive, and also limited science-based tool to measure and manage this risk also create a range of challenges. To overcome, it needs to understand the impact of finance on provision of key ecosystem services and the consequences of biodiversity loss for financial stabilities, and establish an evidence-based approach. So greater efforts should be devoted to these subjects by the global financial sector, and the relevant research and the cross-sector policy dialogue are much needed. Given the time, I think I will stop here. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, organizer. Wish further discussion.
Excellent, and it's great to hear about what the financial sector is doing. You know, for those of us who were in Davos last week, we certainly heard from many, many financial institutions, as we did in Glasgow. I think one of the big news coming out of Glasgow was the fact that so much money essentially was moving, even though not all of us were clear about where it was going. The fact that it was moving was seen as a positive indicator that the financial sector is attuned to this issue. Some of you might have seen that, last week, a couple of weeks ago, the SEC fined basically a bank for overstating its ESG goals on its annual report. It was quite a bit of news that really got talked about in Davos quite a bit, because it was the first time that I think we remember, first time ever, where a fine was levied. Actually, they ended up settling it, but it was really a key indicator that banks certainly are paying a very, very close eye to the nature economy and to the carbon economy. So thank you for that. So whenever people ask me, what's one thing I can do to be more climate friendly or being more nature positive? It's always a difficult question, particularly when I go to schools and speak to young people, because it's quite hard to actually come up with one thing to do. But the thing that I tend to fall back in, and I think Stinger is going to tell me whether I'm right or wrong here, I usually say, think about what you eat and how you prepare it. Right? So for me, I think that one thing that I do all the time that is relatively easy to change is what I eat, where it comes from, and then how I prepare it. Don't boil a whole thing of water for 1 cup of coffee is a simple example of the preparation that goes into it. So 30% of the emissions right now really come from this one sector, which is the food and agricultural sector. We heard a lot about it last week in Davos, obviously because of the food crisis the world is going through right now, and its linkages to climate and climate change. So I'd really like to invite Stinger van Veldhoven to the stage. She's the Vice President and Regional Director for Europe for WRI, the World Resources Institute. And tell us about the food system and what are the tools that we have at our disposal.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. Yes, indeed, if there's one thing which you should say, especially at schools, is if you ever go, I mean, preferably I tell my kids don't go to a fast food chain, right? But if you do, if you take a chicken burger instead of a hamburger, that already makes a lot of difference. Choices in food make a lot of difference. 1/3 is lost, and if food loss and waste were an economy, it would be the 3rd economy in the world in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a world to be gained, but that's just speaking from the perspective of climate. Again, thank you so much for having me here. Before I joined WRI in September, I was the Minister for the Environment in the Netherlands. And also from that perspective, I've been working a lot in this field. In 2050, 10 billion people will live on this planet. And those people will be looking for ways to feed their children, to heat their homes, light their schools and workshops. And the way they do that will determine the fate of our planet. It's those very ordinary, also small choices. In aggregation, they will determine where we go. So the question is, what is the option that we're giving them? Is the only option that we're giving them, is that leading to a barren, polluted environment where the struggle for life only intensifies? Or are we giving them options that lead to a green environment that's catering for all? That is a choice that we have to make. And science is becoming ever more clear about the interrelationship between all of these, nature, climate, and people. And actually you wonder, why has that been so hard to acknowledge? Like Minister Tobiko said, we are part of nature. Why is that so hard for us to accept and actually really start acting in that way? Why doesn't that sink in? Why do we need a conference like this to actually establish that we are part of nature, right? That we are nature. In times of crisis, even I would say, especially in times of crisis, governments have incredibly important levers that they can use to accelerate the transition to a nature-positive and net zero economy, all while ensuring healthy, nutritious, and affordable food for the entirety of the global population. We can never say that something is a solution if it would not be able to cater for those 10 billion people worldwide. And they can also be done in ways that square the circle in terms of how we feed ourselves healthy, nutritious food within planetary boundaries. Currently, at least 25% of global emissions are linked to the food system and unsustainable land and marine use. They are primary drivers of biodiversity loss. And I would say I would dare to say we all agree, right? But then the question is, do we all act accordingly? And there I'd dare to say, no, we don't. We have to rethink how we use public finance to support food security and at the same time reform incentives in favor of low-carbon, high-nature food systems. To put it bluntly, if money makes the world go round, then let's make sure it goes our way and not the wrong way. Because at present, a lot of money is being spent on activities that are actually undermining the natural capital on which we rely for food, water, clean air, health, and for climate adaptation and mitigation. Agricultural and fisheries subsidies are the most obvious example. The world is spending about 700 billion on agricultural subsidies each year alone. And since nature is not free, it's not just that we're spending this 700 billion, but we're also doing it to actually take something out of the savings account of our children and grandchildren. Reforms to these subsidies, such as being supported and pursued in the 17 countries that signed the Policy Action Agenda on the transition to sustainable agriculture at COP26, can offer real benefits for people, nature, and climate alike. But one lesson that I've really learned, the hard way I must say, as a politician, is that you cannot try to achieve those changes if you don't bring the people along. We need to bring the farmers along. But there's one big thing that we do need to change in the narrative. The discussion with those groups should no longer be about if we're going to change it, but how. And then on the how, we really need to work with them to find the solutions that also work for them. That is the only way that we will get to speed and scale that we need. And there are good examples, of course. I'm not going to mention Costa Rica again because everybody on this stage has mentioned it. There's also good other examples. But we see in this time of crisis, they also come under pressure every now and then. India, federal as well as subnational policies intended to support more sustainable agriculture. China's action on the food system as part of its 2060 carbon neutrality goals. The EU's farm to fork. even UK environmental land management scheme post-Brexit. More broadly, we need to reform all public policies that are not designed to incentivize markets to properly value nature. This has to change. We want to protect and restore nature at scale and with the urgency that's needed so as to build resilient food and economic systems. The current context of extreme food insecurity, price volatility and uncertainty may make it seem like the worst possible moment, but I would say it's now more critical than ever, as there is a strong case that the kind of reforms being pursued in a growing number of countries are the best possible means to shore up just those long-term sustainability and resilience of the global food system and the global economy. We need to start valuing the state of our societies beyond growth. And we all intrinsically feel that value of nature. We pay a lot of money to go to Costa Rica to enjoy that nature, but it's also more close by. A walk in a park, a house is more expensive if it borders on green. We all intrinsically feel and value that importance of nature. We need to start valuing it also in our economies. Because what does a salary increase mean if your health bill triples because of air pollution? We need to start looking at this as a system. We have found a way to pay for carbon, whereas first we thought that the sky was endless. First we thought that the ocean was endless, that you could pollute it for free. There is no free lunch, there's no free use of nature. We have to start changing this. And that is why Stockholm plus 50 is such an important moment. For now, more than ever, in the context of all these crises, we need to come together and join forces for change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. You actually gave me back 30 seconds. You're the first person to do so, so thank you very much. And WRI, of course, is on the forefront on a lot of these issues, so thank you. Our next speaker is focused on how to maximize the impact of ODA, Official Development Assistance, the thing that many people talked about. It's only 5 to 10% of the overall funding gap that we need to find a way to fill or reduce, but it's nonetheless an incredibly important part of it. So joining us by video is Dr. Susanna Moorhead, who's the chair of the OECD Development Assistance Committee.
I'm delighted to be able to join this event, albeit virtually, and I'd like to thank Lord Goldsmith for the invitation. I'm the chair of the Development Assistance Committee at the OECD. The DAC is a like-minded committee of 30 members, the largest donors in the world, responsible for 179 billion of official development assistance in 2021. I'm here because DAC members recognise that climate and environmental action are inextricably linked to sustainable development and poverty reduction. Developing countries are the worst affected by climate change. Climate change is accelerating desertification, driving displacement, increasing the likelihood of extreme weather events, destroying livelihoods and lives. And if you live in a small island state, it's threatening your very existence. Nature-positive development safeguards economies and societies for future generations. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. It can deliver triple wins for people, climate, and nature. Developing countries, many of which have rich but threatened biodiversity, need our support to invest in nature-positive development. This is why, in the run-up to COP26 last year, the DAC agreed a landmark declaration on climate, environment, and biodiversity. Through our declaration, members committed to act on biodiversity loss now, because it is central to resolving the climate crisis and to the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people in the developing world. Specifically, this means embedding nature into our analyses, policy dialogue, and operations to ensure that ODA does no harm to nature. This is a commitment in the declaration. It also means making our finance for biodiversity more transparent so that it's easier for developing countries to track the flows they are receiving. We need to use the development finance we have to better leverage resources for nature and to mobilize finance from all sources. The green climate funds need to be more accessible to developing countries, particularly the least developed countries and small island developing states. The good news is that the trend in finance for biodiversity is positive. DAC member support for biodiversity ranged from about 7.4 to 10.3 billion on average per year between 2016 and 2020. Add in multilateral support, which is largely DAC money, and the figure is much higher. This is well above the Aichi biodiversity targets agreed at COP10. In the run-up to COP15 in Kunming, I hope you can appreciate that the DAC is aligned with your vision for a new global agreement and welcomes your ambition. The DAC is working on a roadmap for what it means to Oecd to be aligned with the new global biodiversity framework, as well as with the Paris Agreement. I'd like to share with you some lessons from the process we went through in aligning Oecd with the Paris Agreement, which I think are relevant. Of course, Oecd should not do damage to natural capital, but in introducing new standards, we must respect the wishes and perspectives of developing countries and work in partnership with them. Any effort to make ODA nature positive should not be seen as new conditionality. It should seek to empower developing countries to achieve their own biodiversity goals. No conversation on development finance can take place in isolation. The context for the development community is extremely challenging. Post-pandemic, we were expecting 2022 to be the worst year on record in terms of global humanitarian need. At least 274 million people needing humanitarian relief. Post-Ukraine, the situation is catastrophic. In addition to immediate needs, estimates of the costs of reconstruction range from 200 billion to a staggering $1 trillion. Food insecurity is rising at an alarming rate and was discussed at the UN Security Council last month. 4 countries are threatened with famine in 2022. 44 million people in more than 35 countries are facing the most severe level of food insecurity, short of famine. This means that the precious ODA provided by donors is being asked to do more than is realistic. Needs are outstripping demand like never before. The Sustainable Development Goals are increasingly out of reach. If we are to increase public investment in nature and biodiversity, we will need additional ODA budgets and to draw on non-ODA resources as well. We need to make the case to our leaders and to our citizens that it's worth prioritizing, but it should not be at the expense of the world's poorest women, children, and men. In conclusion, there is much still to do. We mustn't let the immediate crises of war and famine mean that we forget that we are in the middle of a biodiversity crisis as well, which has implications for generations to come if it is not treated urgently. Investment in biodiversity, in nature-smart solutions, and the environment are good for development. It is a critical agenda, and the DAC shares your vision for Kunming. I commend the DAC declaration to you and will share it with you. We are facing tremendous challenges that require speed, scale, and most important of all, political leadership. Let's work together to try and build a political narrative for investment in nature finance as an investment in all our futures, without it being at the expense of the poorest people in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for the reminding us to keep the ODA piece of it very alive and well within this broader agenda of reducing the gap. So now I want to bring up a panel like we did the last time around. It's a great panel, and we're going to get into the question of how. This panel should have been moderated by Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, but unfortunately she couldn't be here. So we wish her well, but I'd like to invite my guests. And before I invite them, let me do a little housekeeping here. This is probably Lee White's fault. He probably just threw these chairs all over the place. Okay, let me make this a little bit nicer. Okay, so Minister from Nigeria, the Honorable Sharon Ikiazor, Minister of State for Environment for Nigeria. Please come on stage. I'd also like to invite Fathia Pustrella, the representative in Europe for the Inter-American Development Bank. And if I didn't get your name right, please, Fathia, thank you. And then Lisa Johnson, CEO of Swedbank Robur. And then lastly, Sylvie Lemay, who's the ambassador, good to see you again, ambassador for the environment at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs for France. Thank you, ma'am. So I'm going to send my first question again to the person who's traveled the furthest, and it's got to be you, I think. Minister, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. Yes. Has enormous mangroves, enormous natural potential. It's also part of the energy revolution that happened around the world, and now thinking about that energy transition. Why is nature and the valuation of nature, natural capital, important to you? Why is it important to Nigeria, a country that, you know, to some extent is built on oil wealth?
Nature is life. It's the life of our people. Majority of our people depend on nature for their livelihoods. And if we neglect nature, we're neglecting ourselves. You can see the crisis we're having in the Northeast region is basically due to loss of natural resources. So it's extremely important for Nigeria to get back nature. And we are already working on that and expanding our protected areas. I know you talked about us being an oil-producing country, but we're looking beyond that to nature. We have come up with our Climate Change Act, and we are looking at nature boldly.
Is that something that is generally accepted amongst Nigerians? Is that something that the finance minister, which we have been reminded is also part of nature?
We've been talking about it, like I have said. Sorry? Move this up. Thank you. Like while I was sitting there listening to everyone talking, we have the same issue of having different ministries in charge of different parts of the economy. The finance ministry, luckily for me, she's a woman, so it makes a lot of difference. So she understands issues a lot better about the lives of our people. So we've been coming closely together, and I've introduced her to the Dasgupta review for her to have a clear understanding of the importance of nature. So we've been increasing the dialogue in Nigeria as well for people to understand the value of nature. And luckily, I'm working very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture and Water Resources, because these are all separate ministries. I wish they were all under one ministry with environment together. So we are beginning to understand the importance of nature in Nigeria. So that conversation is continuing. And incidentally, Professor Dasgupta just paid a visit to Nigeria and met with our economic team. So these are the little things we're doing to try and push for those who are in control of our money, doing the budgeting, to understand that if we do not include nature in our budgeting, we're going to have a serious problem on our hands with the population that we have in Nigeria. So we're encouraging a lot of agro-entrepreneurs to come up in Nigeria. This is another way we're tackling this. Yes.
Sure. Let me come to you, Fathia. So at COP26, one of the things that really made the headlines was this was the multilateral development banks basically issuing a joint statement on nature and people and the planet. Quickly, just tell us what the statement essentially said, and has there been progress in the 9 months since?
Yes, let me first say that, of course, we all agree that we have an urgency situation here about protecting and restoring our natural capital. And clearly MDBs, which IDB is a part of, are a key player, okay, in enhancing and maybe setting the way or a message such as we did at COP26 with the statement. And in terms of numbers, one thing that strikes us in Latin America and the Caribbean is that the countries face a risk that is, you can measure it in damages derived from, disruption of our natural capital, which could amount to $100 billion annually up to 2050. Okay, so given the situation, what we do as multilaterals is support our countries in mitigating and adapting to this situation. At IDB, we have 26 member states that are in Latin America and the Caribbean, and with all of them, we work to support in the green recovery, putting at the center of our Vision 2025 nature, climate change, where nature is a pivot, and we are emphasizing all of our activities around this recovery. very much aligned with all our partner institutions. Another number that I wanted to transmit, given this effort that we are making with the other multilaterals, is that there is a biodiversity financing gap, which is huge. We're talking about 600, 800 billions a year. Okay, so again, what can we do to fill this gap? And again, the multilaterals that came together at COP were also in agreement in finding ways to financing this gap and collaborate together. It's not only a matter of financing, but as we heard in previous sessions, also of measuring what we do, in finding indicators. And so, for example, we are working on a measure of gross ecosystem product. Okay, we're working about this with Colombia, and it's a very interesting effort that probably could be replicated in other countries. And let me just mention a couple of more initiatives that will allow you to understand this commitment, which is, of course, the commitment to increase our climate finance target. We are reaching 35% and planning, of course, on also including nature finance in these measurements. And also, a couple of examples of initiatives that were launched right after COP26. And the most significant probably is our Amazon initiative, which, again, recalling what we mentioned in previous panels, not only works on sustainable development models for Amazon, but brings together the local communities as the center of these models to put forward. And by the way, on Friday, the 3rd, we're having a side session organized with CEDA right here, so you're welcome to join us. I would like to finish and in answering your question by saying that, you know, we are moving forward with the other NDBs, and we are anticipating the new global biodiversity framework. Since COP, we've been doing lots of work, and we are trying to keep up with not only implementing that statement, but truly measuring what we have said we would be doing. And so we are glad to say that at the Convention on Biological Diversity COP, we would like to showcase, even with more detail, not only what IDB has been doing, but also all the other MDBs. So, you know, we are happy to keep up with the great job.
So progress has been made, and you hope to report it at CVD, but I expect you will also be reporting in terms of progress at COP27.
Exactly.
Great. So let's turn to the private sector. So Swedbank was the first Swedish financial institution that signed on to the Finance for Biodiversity pledge in December of 2020. Why did you sign it?
Well, we and many others realized that saving our ecosystem and biodiversity is key to tackle the climate change. And we set very aggressive climate targets aligned with the Paris Agenda. We want to be aligned by 25, carbon neutral by 2040. And the only way to do that is to also look at nature. And when it comes to it, I mean, we've heard about amazing initiatives here from governments and multinational organization, international organization. But when it comes to it, money talks. And I think that the private sector, just as when it comes to reaching the SDGs, are the key to actually pushing this ball forward. So I think that the finance sector can and should use its influence to actually work on these issues.
Did you get pushback?
Sorry?
Did you get pushback from shareholders, from your board? Because there is a bit of that now.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think this is about brave leadership. When we set our climate goals, we had no idea how to reach those goals because we had no idea how to measure whether we were on track or not. So when my team came to me about this pledge, my first intuition was, but how can we sign it when we don't know what to measure?
Right.
And then I realized that's what leadership is all about. It's about showing the way, holding up the flag on the direction. So now, I mean, when we started, there were 37 signatories. Now, today, I'm very honored and proud to welcome 9 new members of the pledge. So now we're actually 98 signatories. Yeah. We cover 19 countries. It's 14 trillion euros that are covered by this pledge. But if you compare it to the Glasgow Net Zero Alliance, 6 months ago, there were 450 signatories to that, 130 trillion US dollars. So we have a way to go on this pledge as well. But as Vian stated before, this is the same, it's two sides of the same coin, where climate and nature needs to go hand in hand. So I think the work, and if you go into the what are we actually doing, I think that knowledge is the key to take action. And what we have been doing, and what the teams in the working groups in the pledge have done, is that they've set, and they actually produced manuals, guides. How do we as investors interact with companies? What do we need them to monitor, measure, manage? And by that, we get figures and facts. And that's what we need in finance, because if you measure it, it gets done. Yeah. So it's, I think that with this, I mean, I'm really proud of the work that has been done by all of the signatories. And I think that now the finance sector, I mean, we're taking the steering wheel, and we will fast forward this and push down the gear.
Yeah, I mean, it really is one of those signals that kind of provides a pathway to the how. Yeah. You know, the financial sector is obviously, you know, very much beholden to metrics and very much beholden to, you know, fiduciary responsibilities that they have. They're one of the most regulated industries out there, right? And for them to take a bold stake in this sector really should open the path for others as well. I'd like to come...
Sorry, I just need to interrupt when you talk about fiduciary duty, because I think that is the most important step that the finance sector needs to do. They just need to change and update their old fiduciary duty. It's not about risk and return. It's about risk, return, and sustainability, where you have both the climate and the nature. So it's a third dimension, and everybody needs to update it. It's not good enough to launch a new, cool financial product that takes into account. We need to shift the bulk of the capital. So that's our final point.
Good, no, absolute great point. So let's come to France. So France has been at the forefront of a lot of this, partly due to your work, but of course also the leadership that President Macron has sort of consistently shown in nature and in climate, and of course in the financial transformation that's happening. The Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting and the Green Budget for 2021. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the Green Budget for 2021 looks like? What is it, Ambassador?
Well, perhaps I should put that in a context, which is the fact that indeed, when we are talking about funding biodiversity or climate for that matter, we are indeed talking about shifting an entire system. Mm-hmm. And what would be the worst thing would be to do just one thing in the hope that it will be enough. And the approach that we have realized that is going to be working is really very much applying the Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which is aligning all financial flows. And that is really all of them. And when you look at it, it starts with the public sector and the budget itself, but of course also with the private sector. And I will just put that in the global context. In terms of green budgeting, I mean, this is something that France has started to do together with OECD. And indeed, it consists of looking into our public finance, our public budget. It is putting the finance minister at the center, not as just one species, but as an important species, as we were mentioning. And sorry for that, with all due respect, of course. But it is indeed, it is very important to green the finance minister themselves. And it's applying a methodology that is basically looking at every single expenditure before it goes to the parliament and rate them in terms of their impact on climate and on biodiversity for that matter. And we have started to do that, I think it was even before 2021, and put that as an annex to the budget. And of course, you don't get it right from the day one. And we are refining the methodology as we go. And indeed, we are finding that very, very interesting, because this is the only way to identify indeed those expenditures that do not go the right way and try to shift them. And I'm just talking about assessing. Doesn't mean that you shift immediately.
But at least you know.
But at least you know. And then to shift, you have to indeed take into account what it takes to shift.
Yeah.
And that's the second stage.
Yeah, so in this green budget, you're really looking at every line item and asking, is it on this side of the column or this side of the column, right?
And some
and
can
ultimately, and what you want is, you want it to tip in the right direction, or at least be even to give us a fighting chance.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you. You're doing some terrific work. It's fantastic to hear from Nigeria in the forefront of climate in Africa. We're going into an Africa COP in COP27, so I hope to see you there. Yes. It's good to see what the multilateral development banks are doing, what a private bank is doing, and then, of course, how the government is thinking about budgeting. Yeah. So please thank the panel.
Let me just drop a bit I forgot to mention. Nigeria is part of the High Ambition Coalition. So Nigeria and Gabon, myself and Lee White, we're planning to have an African Nature Capital Forum with the Ministers of Environment and the Ministers of Finance in Africa.
And you're inviting all of us.
And I'll be inviting all of you, because this is very important for Africa, because the world will not be able to handle our migration due to climate change. That's one point I wanted.
That would be a fantastic outcome, even just from today. Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to return to your seats. And I'm just going to step in front of you. All right, so now to close out today, I want to give the stage to a youth voice, a climate activist, a youth resilience climate champion. Lamia Mohsen is from Bangladesh. I had the chance to chat with her for a few minutes beforehand, and I'm really eager to see what you have to say. Thank you for joining us. Come up on stage here. Let's put you kind of in the middle there, if that's okay. And you're doing a handheld, okay. So you're a youth champion. You come from Bangladesh, from Dhaka, obviously experiencing a lot of climate challenges right now as we speak. This conversation has mostly been about financing, as it should be. Share us your perspective as a youth activist and also as a person from the global south, from a country on the front lines of climate change. What's your perspective on this pathway that has been laid out today? And what message would you like us to take away as we go to other sessions for the rest of the day?
Thank you so much. So, speakers, guests, very good morning. And it's a great privilege to be able to be a part of this event. And I think to be able to share my 2 cents on this debate on how to ensure that we deploy natural resources in a way that that helps to protect the natural environment and on which our very lives depend. And most importantly, to be able to add a youth perspective to that, I think. So we've had a lot of experts, we've had a lot of people with a lot of technical knowledge speaking, so I'll be speaking from, like a less technical background. So what I would like to start is that, COVID-19 has actually taught us that burgeoning economies, soaring GDPs aren't simply enough to carry a burden of, let's say, a dysfunctional healthcare system. And, magnanimous numbers in the form of per capita income is of no use if you don't have enough ICUs, ventilators to give people respite when they're battling for life. And I come from a country which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. We have floods, we have cyclones, we have natural disasters of every possible destructive form you can imagine happening every year at a particular period of time. And I felt that, with the combined effect of these disasters that I see in my country and the pandemic, I think we are witnessing an unprecedented call to transform human society and economies to sort of reset the relationship between people and nature. So we need to take a very hard look in the kind of relationship we share with nature. And I think as the UN Secretary General has spoken very recently, that making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. And it must be at the top priority for everyone and everywhere. And that is something I particularly believe and I can resonate with. And I believe that from the conversations that we have seen and heard today, the imperative to attain genuine sustainability, it's not new. We heard it 50 years ago at the Stockholm conference, and it's embedded in the UN Sustainable Development Goal, the very heart of the concept. And the climate crisis, the catastrophic decline of ecosystems, species, and now the global pandemic, of course, beyond doubt, it shows that humanity has no choice but to respond. And that means moving rapidly to zero emissions, to protecting and restoring our natural systems, shaping policies to secure a healthy planet. And biodiversity and nature contributions to people are, I think, the most common heritage and part of human life. And I believe we can call it our safety net. And this safety net is almost stretched to the breaking point at this particular time where we are standing. So if we look into the world's climate vulnerable people, almost all directly depend on nature for their lives and livelihood. And I can speak from a country where, around a major portion of the incomes of rural people come from agriculture. So it's very important to find adaptation solutions in nature as well. So we have heard from speakers today about economic value of nature and services that she provides us. But we must remind ourselves that failure to act today will deprive future generations of the benefits that we are enjoying today. So I think finding a solution is not the only priority for this generation, but it's our responsibility. And if we are to protect future generations, we must remember that every action we take now is an investment we make for our progeny, our grandchildren, our children, and so on. So to sort of sum it up, that given the intergenerational nature of the climate crisis, the youth demographic will be enduring the brunt of its impact in the near future. And therefore, their preparedness and readiness to tackle this global crisis is a must, and that needs to be underscored in national, regional, and global agendas. So from young global shapers to school strikes for climate, there is this groundswell of understanding that urgent action is needed if we are to secure anything that isn't close to a sustainable future. However, the first steps need to be taken by people like all of you in this room right now, by ensuring an enabling and conducive environment for people like us to engage, to speak, to act. So make us your partners, your collaborators, and allow us to contribute to the change that you all want to bring for us. And with that, as someone from a climate vulnerable country, I would like to call upon all of you today to translate this unanimous belief into action, to capitalize on the power of the youth. Because we are not only your only hope, but your best hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lamia. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. You're the best hope, but also the only hope. And it's really important that we who are in these positions right now don't waste the opportunity we have to set the stage and to invite the stage and make it inclusive to all, and particularly the youth voices who are impatient for change. We can't do it without you, and we owe it to do it with you. So thank you again. So now we've come to the end of our program, and I just wanted to very, very briefly sum up a couple of thoughts that are kind of going through my mind. I haven't talked about my own organization, Conservation International, so let me just give a couple of examples. For the longest time, being involved in a charity, being involved in a nonprofit, the model that we use is we go and ask people for money. Quite a difficult thing to do, to ask someone to give you some money. And then we go and spend it in a place that we think is needed, Bangladesh or Colombia or Botswana or Brazil or Indonesia. And that model cannot scale. You know, I came into this job, I came into this work because of my passion. You know, I was born in Sri Lanka, I grew up in Africa, in East and West Africa. For me, there was never a learning moment where I thought, oh, nature has value. It was always part of what I do. And I suspect that is true for many, many of you. You're here because of love, because you have an intrinsic love for nature and you have an intrinsic understanding of nature that goes deep into your hearts, and it's a passion that you have. But that doesn't work for the rest of the world. It's too difficult to make that proposition stick at scale. You know, if we are really trying to move this and make this transformation happen quickly, within a few years, certainly within this decade. And if you think about the energy transition, you know, Lord Goldsmith was right. It is extraordinary that there is an energy transition happening at the scale and speed with which it's happening right now. It's catching all our breaths. But it has been a long time coming. I mean, the steam engine's been around for a very long time. The steam engine's been around longer than bicycles have been around. Right? It's been around for a long time. And to see that transition happen, if it can happen in the energy sector, surely it can happen in the sector that we care about, which is the fabric of life itself, right? The fabric of life itself. But doing it just through the language of love, do this because it's the right thing to do, you know, and making the argument purely from a passion perspective cannot scale. Now, in the last few years, I'd say in the last 5 years and certainly in the last 2 years, the thing that I have noticed from my organization's perspective is that all of a sudden we're not alone. And interestingly, our allies now are the very people we were trying to sort of fight against. It's the banks, it's the corporations, it's governments. And I don't think that's just greenwashing. I really don't. I think there's some of that, and we should call that out. But I think there's a sincere desire amongst financial institutions to think about the long term because they can read the data and they can see what's coming. I think there's a sincere desire among some governments to really lead and set the path right in the long run. And so all of a sudden I don't feel alone, but I do feel overwhelmed. It's funny when you're sitting outside, you know, you're outside the gates of Davos for many years, you know, trying to get in. Then you're led into the lobby. Then you're on stage. And it's a quick transformation that's happened. So in the positive that I have to offer you today is that I can see these financial flows moving. And that is a good thing because the fact that they weren't moving for so long got us into the mess that we're in. Which direction it'll eventually settle in, that's up to all of us. And I can't predict that. I only know that the opportunity is here. It's amazing when you have ministers from Nigeria and people who run banks coming together to say, this is important, and we need your help to make this happen. So we're on the right place, we're on the right path. We're working on this with the right urgency. I think over a long time period, we will solve this. But to solve it in the time span for Lamia, or what she's demanding, or the time span for my 3-year-old, that's really the question. And if we don't solve it within a time frame that is human relevant, then all of us really ultimately will be extinct. So we're on the right track. We've got all the right pieces. We can see glimmers of hope. Probably the most important thing I have here, that I'm hearing here today, is that there are extraordinary models that are coming into action, like green accounting that, you know, France is doing, or, you know, asking for fiduciary responsibility that includes sustainability from a bank. And it's no longer just about ODA. You know, it's no longer about how does a rich country help support a poorer country in order to make the transition. That is clearly important, but it's only one part of the puzzle. And the other parts of the puzzle are here. Can we put it together in time? Thank you again. Thanks to all of you for being here with us. I just want to, again, give a shout out to Lord Goldsmith and the terrific team, Joe, Andrea, and the rest from DEFRA, who really have put this event together and had such wonderful speakers. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week here in Stockholm.